I believe that when families are strong, America is.
Hillary, Bernie, Jesse, and the new Mussolini? Political analyst Bob Meek and the Theater of Public Policy interrogator Tane Danger consider where America is headed. And heavy student debt and the Polymet copper mine on the range with Left MN blogger Steve Timmer and DFL party sage Tim O'Brien.
These Republican debates on TV.
And blasts and slap shots with Doug Lind at the DFL Comedy Club. We think it's somewhere in Hopkins. We're moving into summer with great stuff we just couldn't fit into the spring lineup. This is Democratic Visions. Here's producer Jeff Strait.
Cheers. The early summer edition of Democratic Visions features lively and thoughtful segments recorded this spring. We like longer one-on-one conversations here, and we begin now with Left MN blogger Steve Timmer and host Tim O'Brien.
Okay, that sets the premise for my question, or the basis for my question.
In April, Steve and Tim talked about Polymet Mining Corporation's controversial open-pit copper and nickel mine and processing plant.
They have come up with a final environmental impact statement.
Open-pit mining would occur 6 miles south of Babbitt on part of the Superior National Forest and land owned or leased by Polymet. Processing for copper, nickel, cobalt, platinum, and palladium would occur near Hoyt Lakes. Steve Timmer is among the knowledgeable who feel the Polymet project is too risky.
Steve, in your blog, you had a kind of a status report of the environmental statement and how it could be commented on relative to Polymet mine, the open pit mining that's proposed to be built up in the Babbitt-Hoyt Lake area of northern Minnesota. Now, this is kind of a complex situation. You have the strong, hardcore Democrats from northern Minnesota, and they're all pro-mining. And you have the environmentalists, some of whom, of course, live up in the range area, but substantial more live in the Twin Cities and surrounding areas. So you have a fight right there between the northern people, the northern Democrats, and the southern or central Democrats. You have the situation where the government has a role to play. They have to permit this facility. Everyone, I think, acknowledges, everyone that at least is willing to think rationally, acknowledges that this mine is going to, which has a subheading of sort of sulfide mining, is going to release chemicals into the groundwater up there that will be detrimental to the area. The groundwater, these chemicals can seep into the groundwater. This mine is not going to be operated in perpetuity. It's going to be exhausted after some period of time. And of course, the question is, then what happens? And people who thought about it come to the logical conclusion, well, you better have somebody that's there other than the state of Minnesota to ensure that those waste products are contained and that the site is cleaned up and that the tainted water is treated. Okay, that sets the premise for my question, or the basis for my question. What's going on?
Well, after several machinations, they have come up with a final environmental impact statement that the parties kind of in charge of the thing, the Department of the Interior, Forest Service, the Corps of Engineers, and the Minnesota DNR have all said, well, it's okay, it's adequate. So now there are people who disagree with that.
It's adequate in that the way it's been presented, it can operate. Is that what you mean by adequate?
Yeah, more or less. That it's sufficient to lay out what the risks and so forth are. Okay. And it probably doesn't, because for among other reasons, the water model it is probably defective. They'll recapture something like 90% of the water that they use and filter it, but that means like 10% of the water, which is a lot, will seep away. And where does it go?
And well, it's 10% of contaminated water.
Right, exactly.
Away.
That's what I mean. And where does it go? Well, they'll say, the mining company, Polymet, says, well, it'll go south. And some of it will, into the St. Louis River Basin. But some of it, because it's groundwater, may go north as well, into the boundary waters.
I didn't realize that was the mining company's position. And obviously, the idea that it would go north into the boundary waters is disturbing. But I mean, do they just say, well, if 10% it ends up in the St. Louis River going south, that's okay? Is that
well,
the point?
I guess so.
Isn't that sort of ridiculous?
Well, I find that disturbing, but you know, and you have to think about all the downstream interests, all the wild rice and marine invertebrates and the fish and everything.
All right. So there is a risk, and it's more than a minimal risk. But now I'm Polymet, but I'll take care of it. Don't you want to take my word for it?
Well, we don't have to take their word for it completely, in that we're supposed to get something called financial assurances.
How they coming into place? Are they set out in any documents that have been submitted so far?
Not really. What's going to happen is that the DNR is going to say, or has said, well, make us an offer. Tell us what you think is adequate, and then we'll decide whether it is. And I think that's backwards. I think we ought to say, well, this is what you need to do in order to protect us.
What do you think we should get from them?
Well, you know, first of all, we need somebody more financially responsible than Polymet.
Why? Does Polymet have a good income stream?
Well, no, it's never had an income stream. It was formed in the 1990s, I believe, sometime. Yeah. It's a Canadian company. The parent company is Canadian. And they have never earned a dime from operations in their entire existence. And yet we're supposed to turn over the keys and ask them not to trash the apartment. And so we need a damage deposit. And I think it needs to be in cash, because the water filtration can fail, pumps can fail. They're going to need to filter this water for, you know, potentially hundreds of years.
That's what I understand.
Yeah. And the tailings dam could break, like the one did in British Columbia a year ago, or did just recently in Brazil, which is a horrific disaster. And in British Columbia, when the tailings dam failed at Mount Poly, they found that they really didn't have much in the way of bonds or financial ability to protect. And this was a giant spill into the headwaters of the Fraser River, one of the biggest sockeye salmon runs on the planet. You know, and it's just astonishing that we're even considering doing this, in my opinion.
Well, I can't imagine that there's a sum of money that would be adequate, much less that an outfit like Polymet or its parent or anyone else, even a surety company, would post any kind of bond of that sort or provide cash, as you indicate.
Right. Well, AIG might.
AIG almost went under in 2008. They would have.
Well, my point exactly. It is just an uninsurable risk in many ways.
Well, doesn't this make this project a non-starter?
Well, let's hope they conclude that it is. I have a feeling, though, that if it were up to the Land and Minerals Division of the DNR, that it would wind up being that they would issue a permit to mine. Now, the good news is, anybody who knows the Dayton administration knows that Mark will be the one who makes the last decision on this, and so I'm hopeful that the top administration officials will put a stop to it.
Well, in my estimation, Dayton has been one of the top governors we've had in the last 50 years. So
yeah, here. I agree with that.
I trust him.
Now, Governor Mark Dayton and my friend Doug Lind have some common virtues. Both are progressive, pragmatic Democrats, and both have been ice hockey goalies. You don't need to duck if you've got goalie DNA. Doug only skated in pickup games in Duluth, but we recently caught Doug's stand-up routine at the DFL Comedy Club in Hopkins.
Mr. Boyott had previously been the UMD hockey coach.
Doug Lind has written jokes for comedy legend Jackie Vernon. He himself is a funny guy and knows that a good punchline is like slapping a puck into the net. Now, you're probably asking yourselves, is there really a DFL Comedy Club like in Hopkins or anywhere else? You're going to have to make your own call on that one. Here's Doug.
Iron Range politics is really hard on Republicans. A cub reporter for the Star Trombone down here in the cities is calling around the range, get results from primary elections. Calls up the election official in Chisholm, and the Chisholm official gives him the results of the Democratic primary, candidate A, B, and C. Then there's a pause. So the kid from Minneapolis says, well, what about the Republican races, sir? There was a pause, and the guy said to him, "Son, are you new on the job?" The kid said, "Yes, sir." The ranger said, "Well, son, for next time, just remember, up here in the range, when someone asks for a Republican ballot, we hand them a get well card." In the Duluth schools, you had to read a certain number of books every year, and I always looked for short ones with lots of pictures. My favorite book that I found for a short read was a book titled Republican Humor and Other Myths. P.J. O'Rourke is one of my favorite writers. He's a very funny man, and he's also a pretty clever Republican. P.J. O'Rourke, and I'm going to quote him on this, says, "The Democrats are the party that says government will make you smarter, taller, richer, and remove the crabgrass on your lawn." O'Rourke goes on to say, "The Republicans are the party that said government doesn't work, then get elected to prove it." I'm an Eden Prairie Democrat. Last election, I really didn't need one of those little red and white stickers that said I voted. What I needed was one of those get well cards. Republican debates on TV look like a circular firing squad. By the time they finish telling us how incompetent all their fellow Republicans are, we probably should believe them. Have you noticed? Here in Minnesota, Republicans are running the legislature the same way they run their own party. It's gotten so bad that pictures of Republican leaders, their faces are showing up on the side of milk cartons. And there's an Amber Alert for Michelle Bachmann. A Republican friend of mine says that after a $25 meal, he leaves a $10 tip and a note that says, "Vote Republican." I said, "Sam, you know, I do pretty much the same thing. After a $25 meal, I leave a 10-cent tip and a note that says, "Vote Republican."
Good idea, Doug. Next up, Steve Timmer and Tim O'Brien on the high cost of college education and crushing student loan debt.
Steve, believe it or not, I view myself as a progressive Democrat. And I do appreciate Saunders pushing Clinton more and more and having her adopt progressive positions. Having said that, I know that Bernie scores a lot of points with the millennials by his public college free tuition plan. And I'm not saying that Clinton started out in the same place that Bernie started out at, but aren't they almost there? Don't both those candidates have almost the same program? And isn't Hillary's maybe even better than Bernie's?
Well, I don't know that I can really comment on that.
Well, I can tell you what I understand it. I understand they both want to have community colleges tuition free. And that's going to help out a lot of institutions around the country. Okay. And then as far as the regular four-year public colleges, I think they both want students of low means to be able to go to school with no debt. The difference, as I understand it, is that Saunders says that applies to everyone, and Clinton says no, if an individual, and I assume their family, has the means to pay, they should be paying some portion of that post-high school education, right, which kind of sounds like it might make some sense to me.
Well, you know, the thing is, I am the product of two land-grant institutions.
So am I.
And back when we went to college, it was darn near free.
It damn well was.
And the millennials look at us now and say, "Well, geez, boomers, what are we, chopped liver?" You know, and I have to say that I understand that, and I agree with it. The idea that college should be much more affordable is attractive to me as an older person, because where are we going to get doctors and lawyers and others who will take public service jobs? They can't afford it now.
But Steve, isn't and I know there's a vast disparity of wealth in the country, although it's not necessarily new. We would probably agree with that. But I've heard that Clinton's stump speech says to the effect, why should the public at large pay to educate Trump's kids?
Okay.
And I mean, to me, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, but then my question to you is, why should wealthy people collect Social Security?
I don't know.
Because they paid into it. And Franklin Roosevelt understood that when the program was first established, that if they made it means tested, that was the surest way to end it.
And you think there's an equivalency between Social Security and free college tuition?
Well, I think the ideas are the same.
It sounds to me it's kind of a false equivalency, with all due respect. I mean, people are going to college because they want to make more than the next guy. or they've got a lot of reasons, but that's one of the end results. They want to make more than the next guy. And fact of the matter is, at least statistically, they will make more than the next person. So it doesn't seem to me that there's a public purpose in necessarily allowing someone to get ahead and somebody else not to get ahead. And again, we're back to the situation of why should the public have to pay for help educate the people that truly can afford it? I'm not saying that some of these programs that you try and qualify for, they extract the last possible dollar out of the parents. I'm not saying that, but there should be some sort of bright line above which you would have to pay your own tuition, it seems to me.
Well, as somebody who filled out the FAFSA form for several years running, I can tell you that they expect a lot from parents.
Yeah. But this is going to be a whole new program. We're talking, the Sanders program is $700 billion over 10 years, and the Clinton program, as I understand it, is $350 billion over 10 years. I mean, this is an infusion of a lot of money into the program.
Well, and all we have to do is cancel the F-35, and we can pay for college for a generation of people.
Well, it's $700 billion. If we're going to cancel F-35, maybe we can spend it some better place than paying for the cost of tuition of somebody that could afford to pay it themselves.
But I think that's the best investment we could make.
Well,
because we're selling generations of kids into debt peonage, and they can't afford houses, they can't afford kids, they can't afford to get married.
I agree with all of that. But no, there's another point to this, though, Steve, that I think is important. Why? I'm going to go to college next year. I just got out of high school. My brother, he went to college 8 years ago. He's saddled with the debt. Why me and not him?
Well, we need to figure out a way to equalize that.
Well, how are you going to do that? Is it going to double the cost? Is it going to triple the cost of get you into the trillions of dollars for this program? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's sort of a hard sell, isn't it? You alluded to the fact that you went to 2 land-grant institutions. I went to University of Minnesota law school and to undergraduate, and tuition was nominal at that time at best. Isn't the problem, among other things, and maybe the driver of the problem, is that the college's spending on administration and on buildings and on everything other than tuition is just been unchecked and uncontrolled?
Well, I think that's true. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You can't throw a wad of paper over at the U without hitting a vice president.
But you correct me if I'm wrong. But does either Sanders or Clinton get to what is one of the roots of the problem? They're just going to throw more money. Well, if you don't have to pay tuition, let's jack that tuition up again by another 100%.
That's a problem. I agree with it.
I know that that's very popular with the people that attend the rallies, and it should be, because you've already identified the side effects of crushing student debt. I mean, it's just, I can't envision coming out of college with the kind of debt that these individuals are placing. And not only does it put a damper on their personal lives, but it drives them out of the professions that they might otherwise want to be in.
So I guess the question is then, how long does
Tane Danger is
Democratic
kind of the Charlie Rose for the Theater of Public Policy improv comedy group that he and Brandon Boat launched several years back. Sure. Bob Meek is a Minnesota-based political consultant and observer. They have some thoughts on the question, what the heck is happening?
Are we in a post-policy, post-truth era? Back during Barack's honeymoon period, people said we were post-partisan. That went away pretty soon. But has Trump taken us into politics that can hardly be recognized?
As someone who will graduate this Sunday from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, God, I hope that we aren't in a post-policy world. The last 2 years of my life would be completely useless. I may as well have gone to house painting school. I don't know. I mean, this is the election. If there was ever an election to decide that question, would be you love Hillary Clinton or hate Hillary Clinton. Nobody would deny that she doesn't have a long list of specific policy proposals and understanding that are articulatable and analyses on, versus Trump, who has whatever he woke up with that morning. I'm not dissuading that simply because it's ridiculous, because I think that there are actually people who that speaks to them. That, you know, I think that George Bush, maybe in some ways, George W. Bush led the way on that, and saying, you know, oh, I follow my gut on things like that. I worry about that. Even if Trump is defeated this fall, that he sort of lowers the bar far enough in terms of policy, rhetoric, and discourse that it's something that we don't sort of come back from very easily. That we just get used to things being conversations about people's hand sizes or other sizes, and that's okay. Without being partisan, if I were a Republican, I would be even more upset about that, because my party was the one that was leading the fight for bringing the bar down that low. I think that it's really bad for us as a democracy generally.
Minnesota pioneered Polymet with Jesse Ventura. What has that taught us about a Trump presidency?
Well, I know a lot of folks actually who were in and around government during the Jesse era, and I think that it's a fascinating case study. You can tell that I go to the Humphrey School because I use the words case study. In that everyone says Jesse did this wonderful job of surrounding himself with brilliant people and actually listening to them. Jesse would come into a meeting and get a half-hour presentation about school funding across the state. And at the end of it, he would ask a very simple question like, but you haven't really talked about how this is affecting kids. What about that? And that would sort of throw policy people like me, for a loop, because we think in data and numbers and things like that. And I think that all of that was really good. People say then that toward the end of his term, Jesse drove off the end of a cliff like Thelma and Louise a little bit.
Look at what they do, not what they say.
And I worry about saying that about him, because he will either sue me or find me and wring my neck. But I don't think that Trump has that. Trump doesn't seem like the kind of guy to me who goes into a meeting and says, I don't know something, please educate me about it, and actually has any sort of intellectual curiosity. I think Jesse, at least from people that I've talked to, seem to actually have some intellectual curiosity about things.
This is what I think.
Is Bernie the future of politics, or is this just a temporary phenomenon?
I think that it's not a matter of teaching people, it's a matter of tapping into a moment. So I don't know necessarily, and I wouldn't even be surprised if Bernie Sanders himself said this, that he's not leading necessarily a movement on his own, but he's tapping into something else that's already there. And here in the Twin Cities, we've had a couple of socialist candidates who've gotten pretty far. Wisconsin has had some that actually get elected. I think that what's interesting and will make that work or not is how far that gets as a movement without building more infrastructure. I still think that we are in a democratic system that requires some amount of infrastructure, and thus far, folks like Sanders and some other folks haven't taken the time to build a party out of that in the same way that these other folks have. And it's worked extremely well this cycle. If you don't have someone with the charisma and the passion that Bernie Sanders has next time around, do you get as far? And I don't know.
Maybe if you're the Green Party.
Maybe. I grew up in Florida in 2000, and so I apologize, everyone, about those hanging chads. That was my fault. I was supposed to get those, and I didn't. But next time, it'll be better. As we said at the top, Donald Trump wrapped the Republican nomination up much faster. How did that happen to Republicans? Republicans, that old line, Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. Not this year. Was it that, Reince Priebus was asleep at the wheel with the RNC, or was it that Donald Trump was just that good of a candidate? I'm really honestly trying to figure out how this happened.
I think it came just because they're bored by losing. And the idea that Barack Obama could defeat John McCain never crossed their minds. And then I can go every 2 years since then. And so they finally got the Tea Party people in there. Well, Trump has figured out how to make Tea Party a little more amusing. And in the end, he's trying to promise that I may not be a candidate you agree with on everything, but I'm the one who can beat the Democrat, and that's what your nominees have not been able to do.
The other piece of this, is it actually Republicans that he's convincing of that? Or is it that he's bringing in different folks who maybe weren't part of anything yet?
You know, it's the exit polls and some of the polling on people who go to his rallies and such. 60 to 70% believe that the president is a Kenyan. 60+%.
We should just point, and that is not true, correct? I just want to.
Yeah. That goes in the
just...
not true category. 60+% want the Confederate flag back. 60+% think that marriage equality is the greatest abomination that's ever occurred.
Are they married? Because maybe they speak from experience.
Yeah, people are for marriage equality as long as it doesn't apply to them. But I think he has attracted a lot of people who would not be acceptable at a Jeb Bush, George H.W. Bush rally. He has opened the door. They wouldn't even be acceptable at a Barry Goldwater rally. Barry Goldwater had people that were with him against the Civil Rights Act.
I mean, Barry Goldwater only talked about nuking Vietnam, not Europe.
Yep. By the time Barry Goldwater retired, he was so far to the left of Donald Trump it couldn't be believed.
So Donald Trump is the nominee. Are Democrats happy about that? Should they be happy about that?
I went through the Reagan-Carter election. I was a campaign manager here. I know that people were just, Democrats, they couldn't have been happier than to have Ronald Reagan to run against. You know, he had the trees cause the most pollution, and you couldn't elect bedtime for Bonzo. No one could take that seriously. Jesus. All of a sudden, Carter, who had been very popular until the kidnapping of the people and hostages, until that occurred, Reagan wouldn't have won. But once Carter was in a box where people wanted an alternative, Ronald Reagan was more than electable.
You heard it here first. Donald Trump is the new Ronald Reagan, according to our guest. So thank you so much for being on Democratic Visions. Please come on again. I'm sure you'll have a better host next time.
I doubt that's possible. Are the tickets free for your improv?
They are not free. I need to make a living, and by a living I mean not starve to death.
So you're not totally Bernie Sanders.
I'm not totally anybody. I am not that. I'm not that much of a cynic or an idealist. I have to, I'm still hoping to get Hillary Clinton on our show at the Bryant Lake Bowl in Minneapolis. So I can't declare for one candidate or another.
If she gets elected.
Well, sure. Or before then, that could be where they have the Trump-Hillary debate is at the Bryant Lake Bowl. It's a beautiful place. You can order food and drink from your seats. What more do you want?
Well, that's it. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Democratic Visions is independently crafted by volunteers, mostly Democrats, from Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, Edina, and Bloomington.